ATO, that means it is aligned and integrated topic. Here, as the anemia, it gets discussed in the various subjects. What we have done is the horizontal and vertical integration. Here we will be discussing we'll be discussing one case history with you, and this case history will also be taken up in the pathology, pharmacology and PSM. So it will be very good for the holistic approach towards anemia. And in this discussion, I'll be concentrating on the microbiology part. So let us talk about the case history first. It is we are presented with a 10-year-old boy. He presents to the pediatric outpatient department with complaints of weakness for the past few months. He feels tired while playing with his friends and is not able to concentrate on studies. His class teacher has informed his parents that he is allergic in the class and his personal hygiene is not up to the mark. His mother has noticed that he has started eating dirt and wall paint. He often complains of vague abdominal discomfort. However, there is no change in his bowel habit. The child reached all the developmental milestones on time, and there is no history of similar complaints in siblings or other family members. And there is no past history of blood transfusion or jaundice in this child. On general physical examination, he has mild to moderate pallor, no jaundice or cyanosis. He is afebrile, no peripheral lymph nodes are palpable. Pulse is normal with normal volume. His height and weight are appropriate for his age. There is no organomegaly and his systemic examination is within normal limits. And the doctor on duty informs his mother that he is likely to be anemic and starts and asks her to get a full investigations done. So from the microbiology point of view, the question is, what is the likely underlying cause of anemia in this case and how will we confirm the diagnosis? This is competency MI 2.4, and at the end of this discussion, we should be able to enumerate the common microbial agents causing anemia, morphology, mode of infection, pathogenesis and clinical features of common microbial agents causing anemia, lab diagnosis of common microbial agents causing anemia, treatment and prevention of common microbial agents causing anemia. So what is anemia? Just in very much brief, anemia is decrease in the total amount of red blood cells, a decrease in hemoglobin or the hematocrit value when it is compared to the normal reference range for particular age or sex. For men, if the hemoglobin is below 13 gram per deciliter or the hematocrit value is below 41%, he is anemic, and for women, hemoglobin below 12 gram per deciliter or hematocrit value below 36% is taken as anemia. And it is important to note here that anemia is not an actual disease. It is generally a condition caused by some other problem. Now, we know that anemia can be classified in various manners. In that, first one is on the basis of cause of anemia. So it can be the blood loss, it can be acute or chronic, it can be impaired production of RBCs. In that, it can be iron deficiency, megaloblastic anemia because of B12 deficiency, chronic disease, aplastic anemia in which hematopoietic cells are not produced because of bone marrow dysfunction. Then is the increased destruction of RBCs as in the autoimmune disorders, enzyme deficiencies, membrane defects or the hemoglobinopathies. Then it can also be classified on the basis of morphology of red blood cells. It can be normocytic when the size of the RBCs is within normal range, It can be when there is any acute blood loss, hemolytic anemia, aplastic anemia. Then the another type is microcytic anemia. Here the size of RBCs is smaller as compared to the normal RBCs. So in that we have the example of iron deficiency anemia, anemia due to chronic diseases, thalassemia. Then we have the macrocytic anemia. Here the RBCs are larger than the normal RBCs. Examples are megaloblastic anemia and folate deficiency anemia. This chart I have taken from your textbook only. It very nicely enumerates all the microbial causes of anemia. So first coming to the ones which are responsible for the blood loss. In that we have the hookworm infection, Fracturus strachura infection, cystosoma, hematobium infection. Then impaired production of RBCs can be because of parasites like Leishmania donovani, Diphyllobothrium latum. In bacteria, we have Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Helicobacter pylori, and certain viruses can also lead to impaired production of RBCs. In that, we have the cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, Varicella zoster virus, human parvovirus B19, HIV virus, and then the human herpes 6 virus. Then increased destruction of RBCs. It can be caused by parasites like Plasmodium species, Babesia species. Among bacterial causes, we have the hemolytic uremic syndrome causing Escherichia coli, Clostridium perfringens, Bartonella bacilliformis, Rickettsia species, Mycoplasma pneumoniae. And in viruses, we have the Epstein-Barr virus and the hepatitis A virus. So it was a detailed list. When we talk about the common microbial agents which are common cause, which are important cause of anemia in India, in that we have the two species of hookworm, that is Ankylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. Other than that, we have the malarial parasite and then the Leishmania donovani causing the Kala Azar. Now coming to the, we'll be discussing in this discussion, we will be discussing only about the primary causes and the most important causes. First, please mute yourself. Anika, you are not on mute. Please mute yourself. All of you, please check your mics. Anika, you are still not on mute. Please mute yourself. Please make sure that all of you are on mute. Okay. Now we'll be discussing about the hookworms first. In that, we'll be discussing about Ankylostoma duodenale. Here the primary habitat is a small intestine, particularly jejunum, and it remains attached to the intestinal wall by its mouth parts. The adult worm is small, cylindrical, grayish white and slightly curved. Anterior end is bent in the same direction of body curve. That's why it is known as the hookworm, because it forms a hook-like structure. In the oral aperture, it has 4 hook-like teeth. These are the hook-like teeth which are present on the ventral surface, and on the dorsal surface it has 2 knob-like teeth. So this is how the oral aperture of Ankylostoma duodenale looks like. The male worms, these are generally smaller than the female worm. Posterior end, it has the umbrella-like expansion, and the genital opening in the male hookworms, it opens posteriorly into the within the cloaca, and females, these are larger. Posterior end is tapering with no umbrella-like expansion, and genital opening is at the junction of posterior and middle third of the body. Now coming to the eggs of hookworms, they are oval or elliptical, approximately 65 micron meter in size. Most of the eggs which you see under the microscope, they have a size of 40 to 60 micron meter. So it is again within the same range. It is generally 65 micrometer in size, and it is the one which is non-bile stained and surrounded by a, if you see here, this is the thin transparent hyaline sheet. So it is a non-bile stain, and this is the wet mount. It is the wet mount in the normal saline, not the iodine mount. If you see here, it is non-bile stain egg, and it has a thin transparent hyaline shell, and this is looking like the segmented ovum. So it has a segmented ovum, and the number of these segments or the blastomeres may vary. They can be 6 to 8 in number. Then there is a clear space between the segmented ovum and the eggshell. These eggs, when these are excreted in the feces, these are not infective, and a female, single female may lay eggs from 25,000 to 30,000 in a single day. And the infected form for hookworm is the filariform larvae. Mode of transmission is through the penetration of skin, and most common sites for that is the thin skin between the toes, dorsum of the feet, inner side of the soles. In the gardeners and miners, the penetration of skin can also happen in the skin of hands. This is a life cycle. When the female lays egg in the lumen of the gut, these embryonated eggs, these are passed into the feces, and in the feces they develop the rhabditiform larva, and this rhabditiform larva transforms into the filariform larva after the second molting, and this filariform larva is the one which is the infective stage. And this filariform larva, it enters into the host body by penetrating skin. It enters the subcutaneous tissue, venous circulation. From there into the heart, lung, trachea, pharynx, where the swallowing happens, and it reaches the esophagus. And here the third molting happens, and then in the small intestine, where they develop into the adult males and female, and the cycle continues. If you see here, this is again the same thing which we have already discussed. Now, ankylostomiasis or the hookworm disease, it is generally characterized by the iron deficiency anemia. It is generally a microcytic hypochromic anemia due to the chronic blood loss. It happens because the hookworms, they ingest blood, they attach themselves to the mucosa of small intestine, and generally the ankylostoma duodenale is the one which is more pathogenic than the another species, that is Necator americanus. Ankylostoma duodenale, a single worm sucks approximately 0.2 ml of blood per day as compared to 0.03 ml of blood sucked by Necator americanus. Besides this, worms, they frequently leave the one site and they go and attach themselves to another site. So they leave behind these small bleeding points. And the anticoagulant, which is secreted by the buccal capsule of the worm, it prevents the clotting of blood at the wound site. So this constant oozing of blood from the burrowing site is important cause of anemia. And what would be the extent of anemia? It depends on the worm load, body iron stores, and the dietary iron intake. And it may present itself in the form of epigastric pain, diarrhea, vomiting. Stools may become reddish or black in color, and the signs and symptoms of anemia are generally seen. Pallor, pica or geophagy, that is the perverted taste for earth, mud, and lime. Epigastric tenderness, constipation, puffy face, pedal edema, growth retardation. Then the pale face with protuberant abdomen and dry lusterless skin. These all are the features of anemia which can be seen in these cases. Then coming to the laboratory diagnosis. Stool is taken as a specimen. On the stool examination, as we have already discussed, non-bile stained eggs, segmented eggs, these are generally seen. And another one point which I want to emphasize at this stage is this, that you cannot differentiate between the two species of hookworm eggs by simple microscopy. We cannot identify, we cannot differentiate them by morphology of the eggs. So whenever you are identifying a hookworm egg in your wet mount preparation, please do not talk about the species at that stage, because we cannot differentiate Ankylostomma duodenale from the Necator americanus just by seeing the morphology of the egg. Okay, so in order to speciate the hookworm, we have to study the morphology of the adult worm. This is the direct evidence of the presence of hookworm. There can be certain indirect evidence like occult blood in the stool or the presence of charcoal-laden crystals. Then on the blood examination, presence of microcytic hypochromic anemia or the eosinophilia. Now coming to another species of hookworm, that is Necator americanus. In that, the life cycle pathogenesis lab diagnosis is similar to Ankylostomma duodenale. There are differences in the morphology of adult worm which help in their identification. Please mute yourself. All of you, please check your mics and mute yourself. Ajay, you need to mute yourself. Gitika, you need to mute yourself. Madhur, again you need to mute yourself. Nadeem, you need to mute yourself. All of you, please check your mics and mute yourself. It should go without saying. As I've already mentioned, Ankylostomma duodenale is the one which is more pathogenic. It is larger and thicker. It bends in the same direction of the body curvature, whereas Necator americanus, it bends in the opposite direction of the body curvature. And the buccal capsule of Ankylostomma duodenale, it has 6 teeth. We have seen that 4 hook-like on the ventral surface and 2 knob-like on the dorsal surface, whereas in Necator, 4 chitinous plates are present, 2 each on the ventral and dorsal surfaces. Then a posterior spine is present in Ankylostomma duodenale. There is no posterior spine in Necator americanus. And valval opening, it is situated behind the middle of the body in Ankylostomma duodenale, and it is situated in front of middle of the body in Necator americanus. Most important point which you need to remember is that Ankylostomma duodenale is more pathogenic, and it is the one which is generally larger and thicker. And the treatment is by mebendazole and or albendazole. We can also use parenteral pamoate. It is important to replenish the iron stores, nutritional support. They all form the important parts of the treatment. Then prevention and control, proper sanitation measures, sewage disposal, personal hygiene. In personal protection, one has to wear the boots and gloves, and then there should be the simultaneous treatment of carriers, and disease with mass treatment can be done. Now coming to the another important cause of anemia in India, that is the malaria. And when we talk about the human infection, 4 species are very important in Plasmodium. It is Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium malariae, and Plasmodium ovale. In India, when we talk about India, Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium falciparum are very common. In fact, these are the species you might have even heard about whenever you are hearing about the malaria cases in our area. Most of the times we are talking about these 2 species. And another 2 species, Plasmodium malariae and Plasmodium ovale, they are also responsible for few cases. As I've already mentioned, Plasmodium vivax and falciparum are comparatively more common. And 1/5 species, that is Plasmodium knowlesi, it is also known to cause malaria in humans, though it is a parasite of monkey. Mode of infection, I think we all are aware about it. It is by the bite of infected female Anopheles mosquito. Incubation period is generally 10 to 14 days for 3 species of Plasmodium vivax, falciparum and ovale, and 28 to 30 days for Plasmodium malariae. Malarial parasite, it generally needs two hosts. It life cycle has two hosts. One is definitive and another is intermediate host. Definitive host, you might recall it from the previous discussions that it is the one where the sexual cycle of the parasite takes place. So in the case of Plasmodium, it is the female Anopheles mosquito. Here the sexual cycle, which is sporogony, takes place. And intermediate host for Plasmodium is the man, where the schizogony or the asexual cycle takes place. Human cycle has three phases, that is pre-erythrocytic schizogony, erythrocytic schizogony and the gametogony. As we can see here, that these are actually the sporozoites. The female Anopheles mosquito during its bite deposits the sporozoites into the human blood, and through circulation they basically reach the liver, and in the liver this is the pre-erythrocytic schizogony. On reaching the liver, these sporozoites, they form the tachyzoids, then the schizonts, and they ultimately form the hepatic merozoites. This is hepatic merozoites. And these hepatic merozoites, on the rupture of the schizont, which is produced in the liver, they get released into the circulation. Once they released into the circulation, they go and infect the red blood cells. Some of these sporozoites, they come and they do not develop further into the trophozoites or the schizonts, merozoites. They just go and rest inside the liver cells, which are known as hypnozoites. So, but the majority of them, they are completing the cycle and they are forming the hepatic merozoites, and these hepatic merozoites, now they are, once after getting released into the circulation, they go and infect the another red blood cells. In after reaching the red blood cells, they go the developmental phases. They form the early trophozoites, which are your ring forms. Late trophozoites, they form the immature schizonts. Mature schizonts, which contain large number of merozoites. And after these mature schizonts, they rupture, they again release the merozoites into the circulation. And some of these merozoites, they into the deeper capillaries of internal organs, they go and transform into the male and female gametocytes. And these gametocytes are the one which are taken up by the another sexual forms by the female Anopheles mosquito. So these are the ones which are taken by the female Anopheles mosquito, and within the gut of the female Anopheles mosquito, they develop into the macrogamete, microgametes, and then the fertilization happens in the midgut. They form the zygote, ookinete, and then the sporozoites. And these sporozoites, they reach the salivary glands, and from there the transmission happens further. So this is the malarial life cycle of the malarial parasite in brief. This is not visible. Okay. So there is difference between the relapse and recrudescence. When we are talking about the relapse is the one which is generally seen in Plasmodium, in Plasmodium vivax and ovale. And here, as I've already discussed, some of them they do not undergo the pre-erythrocytic schizont form. But they remain dormant in the liver cells, and we call them hypnozoites. They may remain in this form for 3 weeks to 1 year, And reactivation of these hypnozoites, it leads to the erythrocytic cycle and the relapse of malaria. It is the one which is generally seen in the Plasmodium vivax and P. ovale. Then the another term is recrudescence. Recrudescence is the one which is generally, although it is seen in all species, it is more common in Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium malariae. It is basically due to the long-term survival of the erythrocytic stages at a low undetectable level in the blood. It is because of the persistence of drug-resistant parasites even after the completion of treatment. So infection is there, but the only thing is that it is present in the means at a low level or the undetectable levels in the blood. Then typical features of the malarial disease is the febrile. It is a triad of febrile paroxysm, anemia, and the splenomegaly. In the febrile paroxysm, fever comes intermittently. It depending on the species, how frequently it comes. Paroxysm basically corresponds to the release of successive broods of merozoites into the bloodstream. So whenever this erythrocytic cycle is complete, sezons they rupture and they release the merozoites into the bloodstream. A spike in the fever is generally noticed, and each paroxysm of fever, it is comprises of three stages. It is cold stage, hot stage, and the sweating stage. And with a 48-hour cycle of erythrocytic schizogeny, fever generally recurs every third day in Plasmodium vivax, falciparum, and ovale. And with 72-hour cycle, it is there and it is seen in Plasmodium malariae. Now talking about anemia, after a few paroxysms of fever, patient develops normocytic normochromic anemia, which is due to the parasite-induced RBC destruction or the splenic removal of both infected RBCs and uninfected RBCs coated with immune complexes, bone marrow suppression leading to decreased RBC production, increased fragility of RBCs, and the autoimmune lysis of coated RBCs. After a few weeks of febrile paroxysm, the spleen, it gets enlarged and becomes palpable. It is due to the massive proliferation of macrophages that engulf the parasitized and non-parasitized coated RBCs. These are basically the differential features of different plasmodium of the different plasmodial species of man. In the forms which are present in the peripheral blood, in all other three, we can see trophozoites, sezons, and gametocytes. Okay, but in the Plasmodium falciparum, sezons, these are generally not visible in the peripheral blood. So only the ring forms and the gametocyte forms, these are visible when we make a peripheral blood smear if the infecting cause or the cause of malaria is Plasmodium falciparum. And generally a single ring is seen inside the RBCs in Plasmodium vivax, malariae, and ovale. In Plasmodium falciparum, multiple rings can be seen in a single red blood cell. Trophozoites, most of the times these are present, these are irregular amoeboid, and band forms are conspicuous in the trophozoites of Plasmodium malariae, where we can see the band forms. Sezons, they almost completely fill the RBCs in Plasmodium vivax. In Plasmodium falciparum, they fills nearly 2/3 of the RBC. In Plasmodium malariae, they almost fill a normal sized erythrocyte. And Plasmodium ovale, they fill about 3/4 of the slightly enlarged erythrocytes. And when we are talking about the number of merozoites which are released, that is highest for Plasmodium falciparum. Now, if this is malaria and this is ovale, I forgot to keep it here. So the shape of gametocytes is very typical for the falciparum. These are generally sickle shaped or the crescentric shape. Because of this shape, it is very easy to identify the gametocytes of Plasmodium falciparum. Generally, the malarial pigment, it is dark brown for the 3 species and it is yellowish brown for Plasmodium vivax. And the infected are erythrocytes, they are generally enlarged for Plasmodium vivax. For Falciparum, sizes unaltered. For malaria, it is again normal size, and these are RBCs are slightly enlarged in ovale. RBCs infected are generally young RBCs in case of Plasmodium vivax. Falciparum affects all ages of RBCs. For malaria, these are old RBCs, and again the young RBCs like Plasmodium vivax in case of Plasmodium ovale. And the duration of erythrocytic schizogeny for vivax, falciparum and ovale, it is 48 hours, and for Plasmodium malariae, it is 72 hours. This is how they look. As you can see here, there are multiple rings in the RBC in Plasmodium falciparum infection. This is the band formed trophozoite in malariae. Then these are the crycentric or the sickle shaped gametocytes of Plasmodium falciparum. Now talking about the falciparum malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, it has the ability to sequester the parasites in the blood vessels of deep visceral organs, and it leads to the blockage of vessels, congestion and hypoxia of internal organs, and binding of infected erythrocytes to endothelial cells. It happens through the erythrocyte membrane protein 1. And binding of infected erythrocytes to uninfected erythrocytes result in the formation of rosettes. And parasitized RBCs, they become more spherical and rigid, so it leads to the formation of deformed RBCs. And there is tendency of frequent antigenic variations in erythrocyte membrane protein 1, which further helps the parasite in evading the host immune responses. And in falciparum malaria, we encounter a high level of parasitemia in which up to 30 to 40% of total RBCs can be infected. Now coming to the lab diagnosis for malaria, it can be microscopic test or it can be non-microscopic test. In the microscopic test, what we can do is the peripheral blood smear. We can prepare a thick or thin smear. Fluorescent microscopy can be done, then it can be the quantitative Buffy coat examination. Now talking about the peripheral blood smear, it is a simple and gold standard test, very frequently done. Here what we do is that the blood sample or the drop of blood can be collected from the ear lobule or more commonly from a finger prick, and it can also be taken from great toe in case of infants. And generally the blood, it should be collected a few hours after the height of paroxysm of fever, and it should be before taking the anti-malarial drugs. And we have to prepare two kinds of smears, one is thick and thin smear. For thick smear, we take a drop of blood and we spread it in the area of 1 centimeter. Generally, because the amount of blood in the thick smear is more, and here generally the number of layers of RBCs which we see in comparison to the thin smear is more. So the sensitivity of a thick smear is better than that of a thin smear. If the malarial parasite is present, then the chances of identifying it in a thick smear is better than a thin smear because the amount of blood is more. Then the thin smear, here what we do, we take a drop of blood here at the corner of one slide and we spread it with another slide so that a tail is formed, and this kind of smear is generally formed. And here these are generally stained with the Romanowsky stains. What are Romanowsky stains? These are basically the compound stains, and here they because of the reaction of the different stains, they result in the production of azure forms, and they stain the different parts of the parasite in the different colors, so we can easily identify the parasite there. So these are a few fields which we see in the peripheral smear. As you can see here, these are the multiple rings. So you by now you know that it is a Plasmodium falciparum infection. I am again and again talking about the cricentric gametocytes in Plasmodium falciparum. So you can see here, these are the gametocytes of Plasmodium falciparum, and this one here is a ring form. As you can see, this is a ring form inside the RBC. This is the ring form of Plasmodium ovale, and this is the band form. It forms a band kind of structure. This is a band form for Plasmodium malariae. Please mute yourself. All of you, please check your mics and mute yourself. Gitika, you are still not on mute. Please make sure that you people are muting yourself. Muhammad Maruf, you are on hold. You haven't muted yourself. Nadeem, you haven't muted yourself till now. I'll be marking all these people absent in my class. So there is no point in case you are not on mute. I'll be marking you absent for my class. Please check your mics. All of you, please check your mics. Madhur, put yourself on mute. Okay. Now we'll be talking about the fluorescent microscopy. Here the blood smear can be stained with acridine orange, and the stained slide can be examined under the fluorescent microscope, and the nuclear DNA, it gets stained green in color, and the cytoplasmic RNA is red. Now the third technique, which is a quantitative Buffy coat technique. Here, if you see here, it is a quantitative Buffy coat tube. It has one plastic floater in it, the one which you are seeing here. Because of this floater, when we are collecting the blood here, all the blood has to pass through this, between the floater and this tube thing, the wall of the tube. So it actually gets arranged in a single RBC layer. So after the centrifugation, we see all the parasites, they get concentrated in these zones. These are the this is the lymphocyte monocyte layer. You can see gametocytes of Plasmodium falciparum. You can find the mature asexual forms here. And then in the RBC zone, you can see the parasitized red blood cells, they get concentrated here. So here the acridine orange, it basically, this is a fluorescent dye coated tube. So as we know that the normal RBCs, they do not take up the stain, and the parasitized RBCs, they appear as the brilliant green dots. The advantage of this is that it is quite faster, more sensitive, and quantification is possible. Disadvantage is that it is expensive, less specific, and speciation is difficult. Now coming to the antigen detection test. Antigen detection test or the rapid tests are the one which are very commonly done. In that, the antigens which we use generally are lactate dehydrogenase, aldolase. These are the ones which are shared by all Plasmodium species. And then the another one, it is the histidine rich protein 2, and it is the one which is produced only by the Plasmodium falciparum. This is how we see it on the rapid diagnostic test. This is the control line, and this is let us say the lactate dehydrogenase antigen coated line. Then we have the anti-falciparum antibody line. If it is negative, only the control line would be positive. In the non-falciparum malaria, only the lactate dehydrogenase antigen would be present. And if it is a P. falciparum infection, then the both histidine-rich protein 2 and this line would come. So in this situation, it is either a Plasmodium falciparum infection alone or it is a mixed infection. And if the control band hasn't come, then it is a invalid test. Advantages of the rapid diagnostic test: it is simple to perform. They do not need any extra equipment for it. It is sensitive if the load of parasite is more than 100 parasites per micron liter, and as it is produced by viable parasite, it can be used to monitor the response of treatment. Histidine-rich protein 2 is a reliable marker to diagnose malaria in pregnancy. And then the intensity of band is directly proportional to the parasitemia and severity of disease. Then the limitation is that it is expensive. It cannot differentiate between non-falciparum malaria species. False positives can be seen. False negatives can also be seen, and the lower detection limit for histidine-rich protein 2, that is 40 parasites per microliter, is needed. And for lactate dehydrogenase, it is 100 parasites per microliter. Treatment for Plasmodium vivax malaria is chloroquine in combination with primaquine. For falciparum malaria, generally artemisinin combination therapy is used. In the northeastern states, it is artemether and lumefantrine along with primaquine. In other states other than northeastern states, it is artesunate and sulfadoxine along with primaquine. So it is very important to provide the prophylaxis against malaria. In that, we can do the chemoprophylaxis by the use of chloroquine, pyrimethamine or proguanil. Vector control strategies are important. Exposure protection, we do not have any effective vaccine against it. In the vector control strategies, we have anti-adult and anti-larval measures. In the anti-adult measures, residual insecticide sprays can be done. With DDT, malathion, space application of pesticide, it can be done in the form of foam, or the bed nets, repellents and protective clothing. It should be used. In the anti-larval measures, mineral oil or paraxylene can be used to kill the mosquito larvae and pupae. Then the environmental sanitation, water management can be done. Biological larvicide agents like Gambusia affinis or the Bacillus thuringiensis can be used to kill the mosquito larva. Now coming to the another important cause, that is the Leishmania donovani. In that we have this parasite. It exists in two forms, a mastigot and the promastigot form. A mastigot form, it exists in two, it occurs in the man, and the promastigot form is the one which is seen in the gut of sandfly and the artificial culture. First talking about the mastigot form, this one, it is present in the cells of reticuloendothelial cells of the vertebrate host. It has one nucleus, then the kinetoplast. Kinetoplast, it consists of one parabasal body and blepharoplast, which is, these are connected with one another with very delicate threads, and kinetoplast, it lies at right angle to that of nucleus. This is axoneme. It arises from the blepharoplast and extends to the margin of the body, and it represents the root of the flagellum. And on Giemsa staining, cytoplasm, it appears blue in color, and the nucleus and the kinetoplast, they appear bright red. This is how they look on the Giemsa stained smear. This is the picture. This is how they fill the macrophages, and this is the picture. Now coming to the promastigoid stage, it is a flagellar stage which is seen in the insect vector, that is the sandfly, and in cultures. Extracellular form, it is long, slender, motile, spindle shaped, approximately 15 to 20 micron meter by 1 to 2 micron meter in size. Nucleus is centrally situated. Axoneme, it arises from the blepharoplast and it projects as a free flagellum from the anterior end of the parasite. Mode of infection is by the bite of infected sandfly, that is Phlebotomus argentipus, and infected form is the promastigot. As you can see here, this promastigot form, it enters the human by the bite of sandfly. So by the regurgitation of promastigot from the gut, this promastigot form now in the skin, it is deposited subcutaneously and it transforms into the mastigot form, and now this mastigot form, it enters the reticuloendothelial cells, and here these are the ones they fill the reticuloendothelial cells, and then after the rupture of reticuloendothelial cells, these are released and they come into the circulation. From there they reach the other reticuloendothelial cells, and this mastigot form is taken up by the sandfly, and within the gut of the sandfly it develops into the promastigot form, and by the longitudinal fission, now after the promastigot form is developed, it reaches the salivary glands of the sandfly, and through regurgitation it is deposited in the tissue of human by the bite of sandfly, and the infected form here is the promastigot. Leishmania donovani, it causes the visceral leishmaniasis or kala azar. The incubation period is 3 to 6 months, and parasite spreads from the site of inoculation and multiplies in reticuloendothelial system like spleen, liver, bone marrow, lymph nodes. And reticuloendothelial cells of various organs, they get pegged with a mastigot form of parasite. And the hallmark of visceral leishmaniasis is pancreatic of fever, progressive weight loss, hepatosplenomegaly, pancytopenia, hypergammaglobulinemia, fever and hyperpigmentation. That's why it is called as the kala azar, because of the hyperpigmentation. Pedal edema, ascites, in the hematological abnormalities, pancytopenia, anemia, leukopenia, thrombocytopenia, along with linked hypergammaglobulinemia. In the microscopy, the specimens which are needed for it, it is a spleen aspirate, bone marrow aspirate, lymph node aspirate, or the liver biopsy. So Giemsa stain smears are examined. In that we can identify the LD bodies. LD bodies which show a mastigot form of the Leishmania donovani, which we used saw previously. Then the culture can be performed to detect the promastigot forms. Culture can be done on the biphasic medium like NNN, which stands for Novi McNeil Nicole medium, or the liquid medium, that is Schooner's medium. Antibody detection can be performed ICT, immunochromatic test, using the RK39 antigen or RKE 16 antigens. These are available. Antigen detection test, then the non-specific test to detect the hyperglobulinemia can be used, like the Napier's aldehyde test or the Chopra antimony test. Molecular methods can be used. Then the Leishman test can be used, though it is not used very much in these days. Animal inoculation into the golden hamster can be used. Coming to the treatment, sodium stevogluconate is the IV pentavalent antimonilial compound, though its use is restricted these days because of the development of resistance against it. So in the resistant cases, liposomal amphotericin B is the drug of choice, and then there should be the symptomatic treatment of anemia. For the prevention, it is very important to perform the early detection and treatment of all the cases, eradication of sandflies, personal protection, application of insect repellents, and generally vaccine is not available till now. So in this short group discussion, we have discussed basically about the important causes of anemia, and we have already seen the multiple causes of infectious causes of anemia. We have enumerated them. So that concludes the topic. Just wait, let me download the attendance now.